Welcome to our deep dive. You guys have given us, an interesting set of sources this time. Looks like we're going deep into the mind of Sherlock Holmes with all these excerpts from Mastermind, How to Think Like Sherlock Holmes by Maria Konnikova.
Yeah, always a fascinating topic, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, who doesn't love a good Sherlock Holmes story? But what's really intriguing is how Konnikova uses Holmes as a framework to, improve our own thinking, observation, deduction, decision-making, all that.
It's remarkable, right? I mean, you've got this fictional character created over a century ago, and yet his methods still resonate. Konnikova does a great job of connecting those methods to, modern psychology and neuroscience.
Yeah, and she kicks things off with a pretty powerful point about, the difference between just seeing and actually observing. You remember that story? The one where Watson completely blanks on the number of steps up to 221B Baker Street?
Oh, classic example. I mean, it perfectly highlights how much we miss when we're just going through the motions. We see, but we don't really observe. And that's where mindfulness comes in, right? It's about being present, actively engaging with your environment, not just passively taking it in.
So it's not just about looking, it's about seeing with, intention.
Exactly. And Konnikova doesn't just rely on anecdotes or, those fun Sherlock Holmes stories. She actually brings in a lot of modern research to back up her points.
Oh, that's interesting. Like, what kind of research?
Well, there's a lot about, how our brains aren't really built for multitasking.
Yeah.
Like, when we try to do too many things at once, our attention and memory suffer. It directly ties into the importance of mindfulness for accurate perception and memory.
It makes sense. And speaking of memory, Konnikova uses this interesting analogy of the brain attic, right? She talks about how our minds are kind of like attics. We have the structure, how we process information, and then we have the contents, our memories, knowledge, biases, all that.
It's a really powerful metaphor, I think. And it helps us understand how important it is to be mindful of what we're putting into our brain attics. Because just like a real attic, it can get cluttered and disorganized if we're not careful.
So true. But how do we avoid that? I mean, it's not like we can just choose to forget things, right?
Right. It's not about erasing memories, but it is about being selective. Remember how Holmes talked about purging his mind of useless facts? He actively chose what to remember, what to focus on. And that resonates with what we know about the brain today. We have the two-system model. System Watson, fast, intuitive, but prone to biases. And then System Holmes, slow, deliberate, more analytical.
So are you saying we should all be ruthlessly decluttering our brain attics? Like, how do we even do that?
It's more about being mindful of what we allow in, I'd say. Like when you're learning something new, don't just passively absorb it. Ask yourself, how does this connect to what I already know? Or how could I use this information in the future? That kind of active engagement helps solidify it in your brain attic, so to speak.
So it's about being more mindful, more selective with the information we take in. But what about all those biases Konnikova mentions? Aren't those deeply ingrained, hard to change?
That's where it gets really interesting because we all have biases, even those of us who think we're totally objective. And there's this test, the implicit association test, or IAT. It measures those unconscious associations we have, revealing biases we might not even be aware of.
I've heard of that, the IAT, but I don't really know much about it. What kind of things does it reveal?
Well, one study that really stuck with me was about doctors. They're trained to be impartial, right? But even doctors showed racial bias on the IAT.
Wow. That's that's surprising.
It is. But the encouraging thing is those same doctors, they didn't let those unconscious biases actually affect their treatment decisions. It shows that while we might not be able to completely erase our biases, we can learn to recognize them and mitigate their impact.
Okay, so awareness is key, right? Just being aware of those unconscious biases.
Absolutely. And that's where mindfulness comes in again. By paying attention to our thoughts and feelings, we can start to catch those knee-jerk judgments, before they affect our actions.
It's like in the Copper Beaches, right? Watson sees these charming country houses, but Holmes sees potential crime scenes. It's all about perspective.
Exactly. It highlights the power of priming. Our environment, our past experiences, even something as simple as the weather can unconsciously influence our perceptions and decisions.
Wait, you're telling me a sunny day could, affect my judgment?
Studies have shown it. People are more likely to make risky financial decisions on sunny days, for example. And college applicants are more likely to enroll in a school they visited on a sunny day.
Huh. Well, that is fascinating and kind of makes you think twice about making any big decisions on a particularly sunny day, or maybe a gloomy one for that matter.
Right. The point is, awareness is key. If we recognize how these primes are influencing us, we can take a step back and ask ourselves, is this really how I feel? Or am I being swayed by external factors?
So it's about recognizing our susceptibility to those influences, but not feeling like powerless against them.
Exactly. Just like Holmes, we can learn to be more aware of the factors shaping our perceptions and train ourselves to think more objectively.
This has been a really great start to our deep dive into the mind of Sherlock Holmes. I'm already feeling more mindful, more aware of how my own biases might be affecting my thinking. But I'm really curious to explore more about how we can actually start putting these concepts into action. Can anyone become more like Holmes, or is it just for, the super sleuths among us?
That's a great question, and one we'll definitely delve into in the next part of our deep dive.
So we're back, diving deeper into the mind of Sherlock Holmes. Last time we were talking about mindfulness and priming, right? Those subtle influences that can affect our thinking. But what about observation itself? Isn't that kind of, well, obvious for a detective?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But Holmes's observation, it goes way beyond just seeing. It's a deliberate process, very focused, like actively engaging with the environment, filtering out all those distractions to really hone in on the details that matter, the ones that most people would miss.
So it's more than just looking, it's about seeing with a purpose, with intention.
Exactly. Remember that brain attic analogy Konnikova uses? Well, Holmes has basically become the architect of his own mental space. He's organized his attic to be like optimized for observation.
Okay, so what does that even look like? Does he have some sort of system, like for filing away his observations?
It's less about a rigid system, I think, and more about cultivating specific habits of thought. Like Holmes is always purging his mental attic of irrelevant information, making sure the knowledge he needs is readily accessible.
Mm-hmm.
He compares it to like a skilled workman selecting the right tools for his toolbox.
So he's like decluttering his mind to make room for what's important. It's like that case, the murder at Lauriston Gardens, the one in A Study in Scarlet. Even the experienced Scotland Yard detectives, they missed a crucial detail that Holmes picked up on right away.
Ah, you're talking about the blood, right? The blood that didn't belong to the victim. It's fascinating because Inspector Gregson, he'd actually encountered a similar case before, but he couldn't recall that vital clue. But Holmes, he retained that information because of what Konnikova calls motivated encoding.
Motivated encoding, is that like studying for a test but for solving crimes?
It's about actively engaging with information and thinking about its potential relevance. Holmes is always asking himself, how could this be useful in the future? That mindset helps him prioritize what to store in his mental attic, what to really focus on.
So it's not enough to just passively take in information. You have to actively question it, analyze it, think about how it connects to everything else?
Exactly. And this applies to everything, not just, detective work. Whether you're learning a new skill, trying to remember where you parked your car, motivated encoding can make a huge difference.
So how do we actually apply this in our lives? Should we like carry around notebooks like Holmes and jot down every single observation we make?
It's not really about the note-taking itself. It's about cultivating that active engagement with information. So when you encounter something new, ask yourself, how does this connect to what I already know? Or what are the possible implications of this?
So it's about shifting from passive learning to active learning, constantly questioning, connecting ideas. It makes me think about that two-system model again. System Watson, the impulsive side of our thinking. How does that play into observation?
That's where those biases we were talking about come in, right?
Hmm.
System Watson loves to jump to conclusions. It relies on mental shortcuts, and those shortcuts, well, they can lead to misinterpretations, flawed observations.
It's like those optical illusions. You see one thing, but then someone points at a different perspective, and suddenly you can't unsee it. Like our brains are playing tricks on us.
Exactly. Those biases, they act as filters, shaping how we see the world. That's why skepticism is so important, even skepticism of our own minds. Holmes, he's constantly challenging his own assumptions, looking for alternative explanations.
So how do we become more skeptical of our own observations? It can't be about like second guessing everything we see, right?
It's more about developing a habit of mindful attention. So when you're observing something, pay attention to your own thoughts. Are you jumping to conclusions? Are your emotions coloring your perception? That kind of self-awareness can help us avoid those bias traps.
Okay, and speaking of traps, isn't the world like full of distractions that make focused observation really hard?
Absolutely. Our brains are wired to notice novelty, anything that's new or changing. It's great for survival, but not so great for careful observation. But Holmes, he's mastered the art of filtering out distractions, focusing only on what's relevant to the case.
It's like trying to have a conversation in a crowded room, right? You have to really concentrate to hear what the other person is saying.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And that ability to filter out distractions, it comes from having a clear sense of purpose. Holmes knows exactly what he's looking for, and he doesn't let himself get sidetracked by anything else.
So it's like having a filter on our mental camera, only capturing what's truly important. But it seems like knowledge plays a big role here too, right? Holmes isn't just seeing things, he's understanding their significance.
Absolutely. His knowledge base is huge, spans so many different areas: crime, history, science, human behavior. That allows him to connect those seemingly random observations, recognize patterns that others miss. He treats knowledge as a tool, basically. The more tools you have, the better equipped you are to solve any problem.
This is starting to sound a bit overwhelming, to be honest. Holmes is setting a pretty high bar for observation.
Well, remember, Holmes has spent years honing his skills. For us, the key is to start small, be consistent. Pick one aspect of observation to focus on, like filtering out distractions or actively questioning your assumptions. With practice, those small changes, they'll lead to big improvements in your observation skills.
So it's a journey, not a destination, right? We can all strive to be more observant, even if we never quite reach Holmesian levels of mastery.
Exactly. And remember, observation is just the first step. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore how Holmes takes those observations and uses deduction and reasoning to connect them, to solve those baffling mysteries.
I can't wait. It's like getting a masterclass in thinking from the greatest detective of all time. Okay, so we're back and ready to tackle the final piece of the Sherlock Holmes puzzle. We've covered mindfulness, observation, and how to avoid those biases that can trip us up.
And now we get to the really exciting part: deduction. The heart of Holmes's genius, right? Where it all comes together: the sharp observation, the vast knowledge, the logical reasoning. Is how he cracks those impossible cases.
Yeah, deduction. It always seems so, I don't know, almost magical in the stories. Like Holmes just snaps his fingers and the truth is revealed. But is it really that simple?
Well, it might seem that way in fiction, but deduction, it's actually a process, a series of steps. And anyone can learn it, apply it. Holmes often describes it as like a chain of reasoning. Each link builds on the one before it, leading to a logical conclusion.
So it's not about some like innate genius or intuition. It's a structured approach to problem solving.
Exactly. And the foundation, as we've been talking about, is observation. Holmes gathers information meticulously, filters out the distractions, focuses on those crucial details. But that's just the starting point.
Okay, so we have our observations, those carefully chosen pieces of the puzzle. What do we do with them?
That's where Holmes' incredible knowledge base comes in. He uses his understanding of, well, everything: crime, human behavior, science, history, you name it. To interpret those observations, he's constantly asking himself, what does this tell me? What are the possible explanations?
It's like having this massive mental encyclopedia to cross-reference your observations against. The more knowledge you have, the better you can deduce.
Exactly. Think back to that brain attic analogy. Holmes has organized his attic so he can access the information he needs instantly. He prioritizes relevant knowledge, keeps his mental toolbox sharp and ready.
So we've got our observations, we've analyzed them through the lens of our knowledge. What's the next step in this whole deduction process?
Now comes the real detective work: formulating hypotheses. Holmes generates potential explanations for what he's observed, and he considers everything, even the things that seem really improbable at first.
Because sometimes the truth really is stranger than fiction.
That's right. And once he has those hypotheses, he starts testing them, looking for evidence. Does it support his theories or does it refute them? Logical reasoning takes center stage here, carefully evaluating each piece of evidence and what it means.
It's almost like a scientific experiment, isn't it? You have your hypothesis and then you look for evidence to prove it right or wrong.
Precisely. And Holmes, he's ruthless in his pursuit of the truth. If the evidence doesn't add up, he's willing to abandon a hypothesis. He knows that clinging to a flawed theory, no matter how much he likes it, won't get him to the right answer.
Sounds like you need a certain level of, like, detachment to separate your ego from the process.
Absolutely. That's a key difference between, System Watson and System Holmes. System Watson gets emotionally invested in its first impressions, even when the evidence contradicts them. But System Holmes, it stays objective, constantly updating its beliefs based on new information.
So it's about being flexible in our thinking, adapting to new information instead of getting stuck in our old ways of seeing things.
Exactly. And this ties into the idea of what's called falsifiability. A good hypothesis, it has to be testable. There has to be a way to potentially prove it wrong. If you can't imagine any evidence that would disprove your theory, well, then it's probably not a very strong theory.
That's a great point. It's like the scientific method, right? Constantly testing and refining theories as new evidence comes up.
Exactly. And Holmes embodies that scientific mindset.
Yeah.
He's not afraid to admit when he's wrong, always eager to learn from his mistakes. That willingness to adapt, to refine his thinking, that's what makes him such a brilliant detective.
So we've looked at all the evidence. We eliminated the impossible. What's left? What's the final step?
Whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
I love that.
That's classic Holmes, right? But even Holmes, he acknowledges the limits of his knowledge. His conclusions, they're not always absolute. He knows there's always the possibility of error, and he's open to revising his thinking if new evidence comes along.
So it's not about being absolutely certain, but finding the most likely explanation based on what you know at the time.
Exactly. And that's what makes Holmes so interesting, I think. Brilliant, insightful, but also humble, always striving to learn more.
He's a great example of, the importance of lifelong learning and curiosity. But what does this all mean for us regular folks? How do we take these deductive principles and apply them in our everyday lives?
It starts with those foundational skills we've been talking about. Mindfulness, observation, continuously expanding our knowledge. The more we practice those, the more naturally they become part of how we think.
Like building those mental muscles, strengthening our ability to think critically and solve problems.
Precisely. And just like any muscle, it takes time, it takes effort. But the payoff is huge. Being able to think deductively, it helps us make better decisions, approach challenges more clearly, navigate this complex world we live in.
So we can all benefit from channeling a little bit of Sherlock Holmes.
Absolutely. And remember, it's not about becoming a master detective overnight. It's about that mindset, curiosity, skepticism, a commitment to learning. Embrace the scientific method. Observe carefully, gather evidence, test your hypotheses, and most importantly, have fun with it. The world is full of mysteries, just waiting to be solved.
This deep dive has been amazing. I feel like I've learned so much about how to think more clearly, observe more keenly, and approach problems in a more, Holmesian way.
It's been a pleasure exploring the world of Sherlock Holmes with you. And keep those minds sharp, keep those deductions flowing.
Great advice. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the mind of Sherlock Holmes. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep those deductions coming.